Hello, everyone, and welcome to Archaeo-Viking, and welcome to part 3 of There Is No Archaeology, Illuminati, a deep look at the false claims of Graham Hancock and an examination of the inner workings of the field of archaeology. Okay, so where we left off, we looked at the first part of episode 8 of Graham Hancock's Netflix series, Ancient Apocalypse, in which he and the amateur geologist Randall Carlson made the odd claim. It is a little bit of an understatement that the scablands in eastern Washington State were carved out not by multiple flood events going back at least 1.5 million years, but rather one massive flooding event that happened with floodwaters that contained icebergs the size of buildings and contained more water than all of the Earth's than all of the rivers and lakes on Earth combined. That is a very odd claim again, which is an understatement. And two, that is not what the evidence shows. The evidence shows that the flooding, it was multiple sequences of flooding, of large-scale flooding that started around 1.5 million years ago and ended around 14,000 years ago, which is about 2,000 years before the Younger Dryas even began. Well, the Younger Dryas began around 12,900 years. So really 1,000, but you get the idea, like a long time before the Younger Dryas even began, which actually brings us into episode 8, part 2. So the next part of 8.2 that Graham Hancock goes into is trying to prove the Younger Dryas happened. Well, okay, let me rephrase this. All archaeologists who specialize in this field, all archaeologists in general, and all geologists do believe in the Younger Dryas. He's trying to prove a very specific thing. He's trying to prove that the Younger Dryas was this massive civilization-ending event that happened around 12,900 years ago. And one of the first things that he goes to is, I forget what state he was in, but he went to one of the areas that have these so-called black mats, or these layers of black, possibly ash or dirt or what have you, in various geological features. And the idea behind these black mats, or at least in the mind of Graham Hancock and his colleagues, and some archaeologists, and I'll get into that in a minute, it's still a hotly debated topic, is that these black mats that are found everywhere from Germany to Mexico to the US to Russia, what have you, are the result of a massive comet or meteor crashing into the Earth during the last glacial maximum 12,900 years ago and causing global fires from the debris that it let off. And that these black mats are the evidence of this global fire. They also point to the presence of these magnetic spherules that are within many of the black mats. And they also bring up a crater that is actually present in the northwest corner of Greenland as the evidence for this impact, the Younger Dryas impact theory, as it's called. So let's take a look at this and see what the evidence actually says. Oh, also, he says that essentially during the Younger Dryas, as a result of this cataclysmic this comet meteor strike, basically this lost civilizations, cities, all of them along the coast, were swallowed up by massive waves that were the size of skyscrapers. So we'll look into that as well. So first, let's look into these massive waves. So the first paper we're going to look at is a paper titled Arctic Freshwater Forcing of the Younger Dryas Cold Reversal by Lev Tarasov and W.R. Peltier. And it talks about it right here. And what this actually says is so first of all, there were two floodwater events during the Younger Dryas. So the thing is, archaeologists are not denying that the sea levels rose during the Younger Dryas period, which started 12,900 years ago. We know this because the coastline used to be further out. We found archaeological sites where the coastline used to be. So this is not anything that's disputed by archaeologists. Graham Hancock, of course, as you can guess, claims that archaeologists dispute this, but no, they don't. But the thing is, the issue with his idea that this was a massive global biblical style flood is it's not exactly backed up by the evidence. So first, as we look in this paper, again, Arctic Freshwater Forcing of the Younger Dryas Cold Reversal, right here in this paragraph, it says that the first of the two meltwater pulses, meltwater pulse 1A, and then there's also meltwater pulse 1B, is that meltwater pulse 1A produced a rise of approximately 20 meters of sea level over an interval of 500 years. Now, that is a lot. That's about 8 feet a year. But that's hardly skyscraper-sized waves swallowing up entire cities and civilizations. So there's that. There's the nail on the head for that. And again, here's the methods that you can pause and read for how they determine that. And then we look at this paper here, Reconsidering Meltwater Pulses 1A and 1B, Global Impacts of Rapid Sea Level Rise, written by Paul Lee and John D. Millam. And then we, pause to read the abstract. Here's sort of what they looked at. They looked at the depths of various coral reefs and various other things in the coral reefs, the depth to age relationship of sea level indicators in coral reefs, as well as the depth and age indicators of others like mangrove layers. And so this is what we're looking at. Yeah, there we go. So what they came to the conclusion is that essentially the oldest dated portion of this reef that they're talking about is underlain by 2 millimeters of reef rubble, suggesting that the reefs may have been established around 100 years earlier, or around 11.2 thousand years ago. This would constrain meltwater pulse 1B to between 11,000 and 11,000.5 and 11,000.2 years ago, about 1,000 years after the Younger Dryas, and a 300 annual interval during which sea level rose from minus 58 meters to minus 45 meters, given a perennial annual mean of given a mean annual rate of around 40 millimeters annually. So essentially 40 millimeters a year over 100 years. That's even less than meltwater pulse 1A over the 500 years. So again, that's hardly skyscraper-sized waves swallowing up cities. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the possibility of the Younger Dryas impact. So we look at this right here, talking about the black layer. Feel free to pause and read all of the methods. Move that back over here, pause and read. And they came to the conclusions that our primary aim is to present the supporting evidence of the Younger Dryas impact event, a major ET collision over North America at 12,000 years ago, which contributed to the younger dryas cooling the massive extinction of North American fauna and major adaptations and population declines of Paleo-Americans. The unique carbon-rich younger dryas layer, coupled with distinct assemblages of impact tracers, implies that the younger dryas impact did happen. And thus highlights its utility for correlation and dating of American Pleistocene. These associations, if confirmed, offer the most complete and recent geological record for the ET impact and its effects, such as global climate change and faunal extinction. This evidence also would present a record of a major ET event having a serious widespread consequences on modern humans. Sounds like it supports his hypothesis, right? Well, and you would be right. I mean, and there are others. There are others that also support this hypothesis, and this is sort of what I wanted to cover. Is that the some archaeologists do believe that this happened. I mean, it's by no means a minority. You know, he's making this out to be like archaeologists refuse to believe that there could have been this sort of impact that causes global extinction. But as you can see, let's go back. Let's go back to that first little thing. See here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26 people on this paper alone. And if we go back down to the next paper, which is the evidence from central Mexico supporting the Younger Dryas extraterrestrial impact hypothesis, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 authors on this one alone. And again, they, in this paper, they also support that evidence. In summary, they say synchronous peaks and multiple Younger Dryas impact markers dating to 12,900 years ago were previously found at numerous sites across North and South America and Western Europe, yada, yada, yada. Although the origin of these markers remains speculative, any viable hypothesis must account for coval abundance peaks in these layers, magnetic impact spherules that we talked about, and charcoal, and I'm not going to try to pronounce that. Currently, only one known event, a cosmic impact, can explain the diverse, widely distributed assemblages of proxies. In the entire geological record, there are only 2 known continental wide layers with abundance peaks in these layers. One that happened 65 million years ago and one that happened 12,900 years ago. So there you have it. There's already 2 papers that show that, despite Graham Hancock trying to claim that archaeologists don't consider this, because that's, I know I sort of didn't say that earlier when I first talked about the black mats, but I wanted to bring these forward first, is that's exactly what he's claiming. He's claiming that archaeologists don't want to acknowledge that this is a possibility, but we have seen at least 40 people, or at least 36 people already, 36 to 40 people already backing up that claim. And so archaeologists do, much like the solstice thing, do acknowledge these things. However, we also have people who are disagreeing, as seen in the accumulation of impact markers and dry wetlands and implication for the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, authored by Jeffrey Pigati et al. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different individuals with this one. And what they find in this paper, you're free to pause and read, but essentially they find the approach taken here avoids most of the issues issues in that a single event cannot be invoked to explain the presence of the markers studied here in deposits dating from approximately 6 to more than 40,000 years ago in North and South America. Our data clearly shows that the elevated concentrations of some of the markers put forth by Firestone et al. as evidence of the ET impact event, specifically iridium in bulk and magnetic sediments, magnetic spherules, titomagnetite grains are common within or at the base of the black mats, regardless of age or location. These results suggest that the markers are likely concentrated by processes of inherent wetland systems and not the result of catastrophic impact events. So what they are saying essentially is that these black mats can date to over 30,000 years before the Younger Dryas and can go to about 5,000 years, 6,000 years after the Younger Dryas, and they are connected to, in their minds, or at least based off of their evidence, to wetlands. And here are their materials and how they came to that. And then we have another paper disagreeing, written by Vance, Holliday, Todd Sorrell, and Eileen Johnson, where they do a blind test of this hypothesis. All right, here, feel free to pause and read, and here are their methods. Feel free to pause and read. Here's more. I'm back now. Okay. Okay, and so essentially what they find, I'm back now. There we go. Essentially what they find is they expanded the range and they found these nanodiamonds and magnetic spherules and all the other things, the iridium and such, in layers. They do find them in Younger Dryas layers, 12,900 years ago, but they also find them in layers about 1,000 years, 1,400 years to be exact, after the Younger Dryas, 11,500 years ago, over 1,000 years later than the Younger Dryas. These results are consistent with the growing body of data that shows that the claimed impact indicators are found in deposits both older and younger than the Younger Dryas. Okay, so now we have seen that this is a hotly heated debate, and despite Graham Hancock claiming that, archaeologists won't consider it, they are, but it's also being questioned and is actually being moved away from, because the evidence shows that it's not just in Younger Dryas deposits. Okay, what about the big hole in the room, the crater in Greenland? Well, the crater in Greenland was discovered in 2018, and it was first written about in this academic article titled "A Large Impact Crater Beneath Hiawatha Glacier in Northwest Greenland" by Kurt Kier et al. And again, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22 authors. And they talk about the Hiawatha crater, and basically they say that this crater is dated to what they think the later part of the Pleistocene, i.e. the Younger Dryas, and it is consistent with the available geological and geophysical data, therefore supporting the hypothesis that a comet or meteor of some sort crashed into the Earth in the Younger Dryas period and caused these catastrophes. Sounds like, again, it supports Graham Hancock's hypothesis, despite his claims that archaeologists won't consider it, right? And you are. But, and here are the methods they use to get all that data. But another paper written in 2022, in fact, disagrees. It is titled "A Late Paleocene Age for Greenland's Hiawatha Impact Structure," written by Gavin Kinney et al. And here we also have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 authors. And what they found is that, in fact, the Hiawatha impact structure uh, uh, is around 55.93 million years old, going to the Paleocene-Eocene boundary. And they say this boundary is marked by global carbon isotopic excursions and initiation of the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. At 58 million years ago, the Hiawatha impact is also distinguishably older than the massive flood basalt volcanism associated with the opening of the Northeast Atlantic around 56 million years ago, and younger than the eruption of the Paleocene lava pile in northwest Greenland associated with the onset of the Iceland mantle plume 62 million years ago. Precluding a possible relationship with either of these events, the age of the Hiawatha impact structure overlaps with the current age of the current best estimate age for the Marquez impact structure in Texas, which is about 58 million years ago, plus or minus 3 million years. It is likely that other impact events occurred around that time. However, craters are quickly removed on Earth, and many preserved impact structures are yet to be found, and most of the known impact structures have relatively poor constraints. Yeah. So therefore, this is it's more likely that this crater was not based off of this age, which is millions of years before the Younger Dryas, that this was not the cause of the Younger Dryas event at all. Okay, so the next thing they bring up is the extinction of the megafauna, i.e., the large-scale mammals like mammoths and mastodons, ground sloths, dire wolves. In America, you have the American lion, which was bigger than the African lion. You had the short-faced bear, which was bigger than both the polar bear and the grizzly bear. You had ancient bison that were bigger than the modern bison, etc., etc. And the idea that Graham Hancock and a lot of people have brought forward, and including some archaeologists, and again I'll get to that. He also says that he doesn't think archaeologists believe this, but as we've shown, he's either lying. Well, I don't want to say. I'm not going to go that way. As we've shown that that's not the case. We'll just say that it's not the case at all. So let's look at this. What does the archaeological data show? Well, first, it shows that one paper written by Felicia Smith, Rosemary Smith, Kathleen Lyons, and Jonathan Payne, titled Body Size Downgrading of Mammals Over the Lake Quaternary, suggests that over the past few million years, mammal bodies have begun to downgrade in size. And who do they think this was because? It says right here, and feel free to pause to read, and I'll go back and let y'all look over this and pause to read again for a second. Anyways, there you go. Anyways, what it says here is that it highlights a long and sustained influence of humans and other hominids on terrestrial ecosystems. Essentially, so what it argues is that these animals began to downgrade in size because of humans becoming a apex predator and hunting them. And so the human influence of, like, say, Homo erectus and then Homo heidelbergensis and Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens is why animals began to go extinct, and why they actually began to decrease in size. However, a similar paper written by J. Tyler Faith, John Rowan, Andrew Dew, and Paul L. Koch, titled Pliocene Decline of African Mega-Herbivores, No Evidence for Ancient Hominid Impacts, disagrees. And here's some of their data. Go back and I'll pause to read the abstract. and pause to read the graph, pause to read the other graph. And so essentially, they say we note the conclusion they come to is we note that the CO2 driven expansion of grasslands and the associated extinction of mega herbivores cannot account for other changes in East African mammal communities that have been attributed to ancient hominin impacts. As noted earlier, the loss of richness and functional diversity among the Eastern African carnivorans throughout the Pleistocene has been attributed to the encroachment of Homo into the large carnivore guild. However, some extinct Pleistocene carnivorans lacking modern analogs are known to have specialized on juvenile megaherbivores. Given the close association between the large carnivore diversity and herbivore diversity, the loss of megaherbivore prey likely contributed directly to the extinction of attendant carnivores. Thus, in the absence of detailed consideration of Eastern African herbivores, it is premature to invoke hominin impacts as an important driver to carnivoran diversity loss and associated ecosystem change, together with our observations indicating that the bottom-up process cannot account for the loss of megaherbivores. It follows that in the search for anthropogenic impacts on ancient African ecosystems, we must focus our attention on one species known to be capable of causing them, Homo sapiens, over the past 300,000 years. So essentially, for the most part, humans were not affecting the decline of megafauna. It was the environment. So here we have two conflicting things. One saying no, the environment, like the Younger Dryas, was not the reason the megafauna went extinct. And one saying that yes, it might have been, rather than the humans. But again, it's not that simple. We have this paper, Population Reconstructionist for Humans and Megafauna, suggests mixed causes for North American Pleistocene extinctions, written by Jack M. Broughton and Ellick Weitzel. And here are their pause to read. Here are their what they were looking at. And essentially what they say is that some animals, such as mammoth and horse, did have population declines due to human foragers. However, it is not the case of for other animals such as the ground sloth and mastodon, because those appear to be linked to more of the Younger Dryas. So essentially, it's a bit of a mixed bag. The Younger Dryas may have impacted some animals and may have impacted and not impacted any. So you might ask, Dane, why are you bringing these up? You know, the whole idea was, well, Graham Hancock was claiming the Younger Dryas killed all of the megafauna. Well, the reason I'm bringing this up is because the variability of how the Younger Dryas and the changing environment affected or didn't affect animals brings into question just how bad the Younger Dryas was, because in Graham Hancock's mind, the Younger Dryas is this world-ending event where civilizations were literally swallowed up and erased from existence, and entire species were wiped from existence, and this, that, and the other. But here we are, we have 3 different papers with 3 different results saying that, you know, so we have one saying that humans were the cause for extinction of megafauna, one saying that megafauna were already sort of starting to decline long before then, and the other saying that it was a little bit of both. And so, again, I bring this up because this essentially means that the Younger Dryas might not have been quite as bad as people like Graham Hancock and even other archaeologists, but still people like Graham Hancock are bringing forward. And I should state that I keep saying even archaeologists, but those archaeologists are also putting out things like this. They're not denying the Younger Dryas at all. So, anyways, and here's some more of that, showing that essentially, like, say, the mammoth, again, hunting, mastodon, sloth, cold, climate change, horses, smilon, hunting, sloth, cold, etc., etc. And here are their methods and sort of the ways they came to these conclusions. Feel free to pause and read. I'll go back and let you pause and read this as well. And then you can pause and read here. And they even acknowledge potential sources of error, which is important. Pause and read. Okay, so now we're going to move on a little bit. We're going to sort of take a look at the Younger Dryas as a whole. So like I said, the reason I brought up the collapse of the megafauna is sort of to bring to everyone's attention, and I know I was a little coy about it, but I did that for a reason, to bring to everyone's attention the possibility that perhaps the Younger Dryas might not have been as bad as Graham Hancock is letting on. And again, it's as bad as some archaeologists are letting on, but as you've seen, the archaeologists are not making the claims that Graham Hancock is, other than the possibility of the impact theory. And so I want to move on and bring up this possibility by showing the impact the Younger Dryas had on humanity as a whole. And we're going to look at a few different places. Now, we've already looked at the impact of the Younger Dryas on the cultures of the Levant and the Near East around Göbekli Tepe and Israel and such way back in part 1. So we already know how they went. They were definitely affected by the Younger Dryas, and that the extremes of the Younger Dryas definitely led them to more sedentary life, though not agriculture quite yet. So let's look at other places. The first we're going to look at is China, and in this paper titled Microblade Technology and the Rise of Serial Specialists in North China, written by Mingji Yu et al. And here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 authors. And I know I haven't said this yet, but I'm going to explain why later in the video. I'm counting the authors. It is for a reason. I just want you to make note that I was doing that. And so what this paper looks at is the development of multiple new technologies. Well, to be fair, microblade technologies were already being used during the Paleolithic. So anyways, but still, these development of new technologies. And what this paper looks at is the development of specialized ways of using these microblade technologies, and i.e. break off tiny little blades of chert and use them in specialty tools. And we have more showing like milling stones and things like that, and chipstone. And here's sort of the frequencies of that, and like the number of migrations per year, the dependency on storage methods, the longest stay in winter or dry season camps, and things like that. And so what these show is so essentially the conclusion said, evidence suggests that the connection between microblades and Younger Dryas hunting adaptation in north central China is less about weaponry than the production of sophisticated clothing needed to make winter mobility and hunting feasible. Winter sedentism does not entirely eliminate, but substantially relaxes clothing requirements. Fires and built and well-positioned shelters provide sufficient protection, tethered to their cold season stores. The winter sedentary Great Basin Shoshone used as their chief piece of clothing a simple rabbit skin blanket. In contrast, the winter mobile Korean Ojibwa fashioned hair into parkas, hoods, mittens, and leggings. The Phlegon example shows it is possible for well-conditioned adults to move short distances in extreme cold without fitted clothing, but longer trips would have been extremely difficult for children. The pre-late glacial maximum peoples of north-central China may have been winter sedentary, as Gobel 2002 hints, for pre-late glacial maximum Siberians, and for this reason, unable to weather late glacial maximum climatic deterioration. Alternatively, they may have been winter mobile but lacked the technology needed to bring this off during the more severe late glacial maximum winters. This capability arising only with the development of sophisticated winter clothing and the microblade technology essential for its production. It is important in closing to make our argument very clear. We do not argue that microblades were not used as weapon insets, clearly they were, or that microblade technology did not originally develop for this purpose, clearly it might have. We merely argue that the Younger Dryas ascendance of microblade technology in north-central China is the result of its importance in craft work, essential to a highly mobile, serially specialist lifestyle, the production of clothing in particular. While microblades were multifunctional, this is much as certain. Of the very few microblade edge tools known from north-central China, all are knives, none are points. If microblades were mainly for weapons, it should be the other way around. So, i.e., what this is saying, essentially, with China, you have a very similar thing happening as with in the Near East and the Levant. Essentially, yes, the people in China were affected by the Younger Dryas, but rather than being a civilization-ending event, rather than being a world-ending event, it seems to have been the catalyst to increasing sedentism, and to increasing production, and increasing resource production and resource storage, and things like that. So again, you can pause here to read. I'll go back real quick and let you pause and read these graphs again. Right here. Pause and read. Oh, wrong one. Pause and read. All right. Surely everyone should have read it by now. Okay. Yeah, exactly. And so now we're going to take a look at real quick what microblade technology they're talking about. So essentially, microblades were lithic material or stone blades or stone tools that were broken off of a material like chert or say jasper or something like that, and they were inset into either bone or wood in these sort of saw, blade, knife-like fashions. Though some of them were definitely points, most of them were knives. So the importance of microblade technologies in China during the Younger Dryas period are talked about again in this paper titled "The Late Pleistocene Intensification of Technologies in Northern China" by Robert G. Elston, Dong Huang Hui, and Zhang Dongju. Pause to read the abstract, and then pause to read the graph that shows the artifacts that we're looking at. Okay, so what their conclusions show is very similar to the last paper. Essentially, microblade technologies like microblade knives were highly adaptable. They were originally used for single mobile foraging focused on hunting, but they were also incredibly flexible and were able to be repurposed in the Neolithic, as seen in the last paper, where they were used for cutting up clothing and such. And what they also find in this paper, because they don't just focus on the microblades, they also, as you saw in the graph, they also looked at milling stones and pottery. And so what they determined is that pottery was likely initially produced and was used to produce bone grease. As you know, yeah, and as well as to cook plants, but it's not known if that's what the purpose it was used for until the late Pleistocene. And the pottery and milling stones seem to occur together for the first time, generally. But what those were used for in the two sites they were originally they seem to come from the earliest is unknown. It also talks about how foragers increased in populations, lowered their mobility, and broadened their diets as the Younger Dryas began to move into the Neolithic and the Bronze Age. But they also had sort of reverse trends as the late Pleistocene moved into the Younger Dryas, as more steppe environment began to increase. We also know it also talks about how agriculture seems to not have started until about 1,000 years after the end of the Younger Dryas, with the milling stones being used for seed processing generally sporadically, and pottery was generally until agriculture was developed and they began to use them and repurpose them for the cooking of seeds and various other things. And that the first plant they domesticated was millet because of how much it could survive in the environment that occurred shortly after the end of the Younger Dryas. So essentially, what this paper and the last paper are showing is that, in much a similar way to the cultures, the Naftuan cultures of the Levant in the Near East, the Younger Dryas most certainly did affect them, but rather than being a world-ending event, it was actually probably, based off of the archaeological evidence, the thing that actually led to the further development of more sedentary societies rather than the end of them. And here you go, you can pause to read more of this. It talks about sort of like things that they find, the pollen and, the ground axes and things like that. Okay, so one thing that paper mentioned that I would like to bring up is the use of pottery. So that paper was from 2011. And at that point in time, they weren't aware of when pottery was invented or developed at all. It was just sort of unknown. Well, in this paper, titled Early Pottery at 20,000 Years Ago in Jian Rendong Cave, published in 2018, I believe, authored by Xiao Hong Wu et al., they were able to use radiometric dating to date the pottery in North China to around 20,000 years ago. And so you might ask, well, what do they think it was used for? And feel free to pause to read to understand this. Pause to read more. Yeah. Okay, you pause to read, and this is their methods. And so what they determined was pottery essentially was used as a way to, sort of much like microlithic technology. It was used as a way to make things easier. It was a what was the term they used back at this paper? Intensification technology. It was used as an intensification technology. And so essentially what they saw is the creation of pottery coincided with the peak of the last glacial maximum, where there was a decrease in productivity of food resources. So pottery allowed for more energy gains with cooking food as meat, as well as cooking other things like possibly even beer, because we know beer was developed quite a long time ago. The function of the pottery remains unknown, but generally they do think that it was probably used as a way of food preparation and storage, brewing alcoholic beverages, and played a vital role in feasting. And i.e. was a form of getting more nutrients for your buck, preserving your food resources, and essentially was a way, something that allowed for these cultures to sort of grow in population and were able to store more food. So in a way, the cultures in Northwest China and North China were already sort of were beforehand, before the Younger Dryas even began, were already prepared for what the Younger Dryas had to throw at them. Okay, so now that we've looked at China, let's go over to my home continent and my home country, the U.S. and North America. So this paper titled Spatiotemporal Dynamics of the Clovis-Folsom Transition, authored by Mark Collard, Briggs Buchanan, Marcus J. Hamilton, and Michael J. O'Brien. And pause to read. And here's their methods and their tables. And so what their conclusion shows is that the radiocarbon, essentially what it shows is that the Younger Dryas actually led to more technological development in the Americas. So rather than an abrupt end to the Clovis, there was just a slow transition into from the Clovis into the Folsom. And you might ask why. And ask why. Well, it's because the Clovis Paleo-Indians subsisted mainly on, hunting down megafauna. But as the megafauna began to die out, both from a combination of overhunting as well as climate change, these peoples had to make the transition because the animals began to get smaller. So the Clovis people actually adapted and began developing new technologies based on called the Folsom Folsom points to hunt smaller animals. And so they were able to adapt and adjust to their environment rather than die out and be replaced by, say, the Folsom culture. In the case of North America, it seems the Younger Dryas not only didn't really affect them that much of the loss of their big game, but it actually spurred technological development. It didn't impede technological development. It didn't destroy cultures. It actually created cultures. Similarly, as we talked about in that last paper about China, we take a look at China again and how it talked about how agriculture wasn't developed until 11,000 years ago, 0.5 years ago. And I apologize for not moving this further back to the China part, but it is important to bring up because after the Younger Dryas, the earliest forms of agriculture developed were actually in China with the domestication of millet 11,500 years ago. You can see right here. You can pause to read the paper. You can see right here, pause to read again, but the conclusion is the data shows that millet was domesticated around 11,000 or so years ago in East Asia. In the presence of starch grains on processing tools is a strong indicator that millet seeds were ground into flour and milled using stone tools and then cooked in earthenwares, etc., etc. So agriculture was developed here in China 11,000 years ago. And then we move on to this paper titled The Origin and Domestication of... So let me go back and tell you the title of this. Early Millet Use in North China. Anyways, this paper titled The Origin and Domestication of Cucurbitaceae Crops, Insights on Phylogenes, Genomics, and Archaeology. I know I butchered that. And what this paper shows, is essentially the next earliest place where plants were domesticated was in America, and it was squash. And this study talks about that, where domestication started 11,000 years ago in both the New World and Asia. In the New World, the first plant being domesticated being pumpkins around 10,000 years ago. So what we're looking at here is that agriculture after the Younger Dryas first showed up in China and South America right around the same time. And now you're asking, why are you bringing this up, Dane? Well, because one, this is 11,000 years or 11,500 years is only about 1,000 years after the Younger Dryas ended. And it was right around, the same time that that essentially Göbekli Tepe was built, 1,000 years before, but still. And one key factor in this is that Göbekli Tepe and the cultures around it were a pre-pottery, pre-agriculture civilization. They were still hunters and gatherers. So I want to postulate this question. If there was a civilization that was here in the Ice Age before before the fall, before the Younger Dryas, and that civilization fell during the Younger Dryas, and then the survivors spread out and created civilization, why would they show up to each of these sites around 1,000 years after they fell? Go back to Tepe, China, South America. And for one, why would they go to China, teach them how to make pottery? For one thing, pottery was already made 20,000 years ago. But, why would they go to China, teach them how to farm, and go to South America and teach them how to farm, and show them how to make pottery, and then they go back to Tepe, don't teach them how to farm, don't teach them how to make pottery, but teach them how to make monumental architecture, while not teaching either China or South America to make monumental architecture. Do you see this is the issue, one of the for me the biggest issue with Hancock's hypothesis, and the archaeological record paints that very clearly. And here, here's the methods. Yeah, right here. Okay. And so now we're going to go to these areas. Oh, why is that not here? Where's that? Oh, that's why. Okay, I missed some spots. Okay, so another big issue with Graham Hancock's hypothesis with the Younger Dryas is, so as we've said repeatedly already, the Graham Hancock's hypothesis with the Younger Dryas is that there was a pre-ice age, ice age, late glacial maximum civilization, and that was swallowed up by the sea and completely wiped out. There's a big issue with this. Is because archaeologists are all the time finding archaeological sites under the water, and they have yet to find an Atlantis level civilization under the water. And one of the biggest sort of nails in the coffin, as I keep saying, for this hypothesis is the presence of these underwater sites, such as Doggerland. So Doggerland, as described in this paper, multi-proxy ecological approaches to submerged landscapes, a case study from Doggerland and the South Northern Sea, written by Benjamin Geary et al. Doggerland was essentially this Neolithic community that was sort of established itself around this area called Doggerland when the North Sea was at a lower sea level, around 10,000, sort of 16,000 years ago, but really 10,000 years ago. And we have quite a lot of evidence for it. And here are the conclusions. So essentially, what this means is we know what we know what the Ice Age, the late glacial maximum cultures were like, and we find their sites off the coast of Doggerland and other places. And they were definitely Neolithic, Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, not an Atlantis Egyptian style civilization. And again, pause to read. These are the conclusions they find. And they also talk about here in this paper targeting Mesolithic interdisciplinary approaches to archaeological prospection in the Brown Bank area, southern North Sea by Time Missing et al. Again, pause to read, where they again talk about sort of what the makeup of Doggerland was. And again, it was still a Mesolithic, late Paleolithic society, hunter-gatherer society that was beginning to have more increased sedentism, and they eventually got swallowed up by the sea. So again, if we're finding sites like this off the coast of places like England and Denmark and Germany underwater, and we're finding places around, say, the coast of America and such, where he's claiming actually that Atlantis comes from, but I didn't cover that because it's irrelevant. Why aren't we finding his so-called lost ancient Atlantis civilization? Like, we're finding these and they were swallowed up by the sea. Why can't we find his Atlantis civilization? It's because it doesn't exist. Okay, so now that we've gotten all that out of the way, now that we've gotten all of his claims in these episodes out of the way, like we've talked about episodes 1 through 8, in episode 8 we covered and went in depth on what the Younger Dryas was, what the evidence shows, how the evidence, what the evidence tells us about how bad or not bad the Younger Dryas was, what the evidence tells us about what happened to the megafauna, what the evidence tells us about the flooding, etc., and how humans adapted. But now we need to move on to another one of Graham Hancock's claims. In fact, the claim he touts even more than his Atlantis claim, at least as much as his Atlantis claim, and that is that the modern archaeological community is corrupt, and that essentially, if you come up with any new ideas or you try to buck against the status quo, your career will be ruined. So now I'm going to debunk that, and I'm doing that with this section called Why Is There No Archaeology Illuminati? Because that's essentially what he's describing. He's describing a group that essentially, if you come up with any new ideas in this field that buck against the status quo, a guy in Spec Ops gear will show up behind you and blow your brains out. I mean, he doesn't say that. He says they'll ruin your career, but that's essentially what he's saying. Like, I've already shown multiple different conflicting views in this thing, yet I haven't disappeared. I haven't been doxxed. I haven't been canceled. So anyway, so let's go into this in depth. So you might be asking, what is the evidence that there is that the field of archaeology is not this way? Well, for one thing, there's this man, John Cinq-Mars, who was an individual who for decades worked in a archaeological site called the Bluefish Caves in Canada. And he was one of the first people who sort of bucked against and disagreed with the idea that the Clovis peoples were the first peoples to come to North America around 12,800 years ago, during the end of the late glacial maximum. Sorry, 13,000 years ago, during the late the last part of the late glacial maximum. And yes, he was critiqued, and many archaeologists didn't believe his evidence. But again, they also, as I said earlier, with the teeth, they did this because they didn't feel there was sufficient evidence. This would actually eventually change. And furthermore, despite their critique of this, their critique of his hypothesis, he didn't lose his job. He never lost his job. He worked for over 10 years, well after his hypothesis, at the Bluefish Caves. He was paid. He was still a working archaeologist. He had a fine career. He didn't like how a lot of archaeologists disagreed with this hypothesis, sure, but he definitely had a fine career. And again, their disagreements were that they didn't feel that the evidence was sufficient. So eventually this did change, however, with the with the discovery of things such as first you had things like there. Okay. You had the discovery of Monteverde. Really, Monteverde was an archaeological site that was discovered in the 1970s, but in the 1990s, Monteverde was positively dated to around what's it say here? Dated to 14,000 years ago, around 2,000 years before the Clovis people even came into the Americas. And once Monteverde had been tested and had been proven, and this paper was written by Taylor, R.E. Taylor, C. Vance Haynes Jr., Donna L. Kierner, and John R. Southen. Once these individuals tested this area positively to be older than the Clovis by about 1,000 years, give or take. I said 2,000, but it's about 1,000 years, give or take. Even the staunchest opponents of the pre-Clovis theory changed their minds. They began to change their minds all over the place. Now, there are some who still believe in the Clovis first, but they are in the minority, actually, not the other way around, which in itself shows how new ideas are definitely accepted. Not only that, this idea keeps growing. You see, if we had one where it showed in 2021 where footprints were in White Sands National Park in New Mexico were dated to around 23,000 years ago, pushing the human set the Paleo-Indian migration to America back even more. Remember, it's been pushed back several times. First 14,000 years, and then it went to 18,000 years, and it was pushed back several more thousand years to 23,000 years. And it was authored, and it's titled "Evidence of Humans in North America During the Last Glacial Maximum," authored by Matthew R. Bennett et al. And again, we see here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 authors. And then another paper came out only the year after, in 2021, in July of this year, titled "Human Occupation of the North American Colorado Plateau 37,000 Years Ago," authored by Timothy Rowe et al. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 authors, and it's talking about how there's evidence of mammoth butchering by Paleo Indians going back 37,000 years ago in Colorado, if not more. In fact, you see right here, it's suggesting 38,000 to 39,000 years ago, possibly 38,900. I'm rounding up, but still. So for one thing, so essentially what that means, what I want to talk about with that is, and I've already talked about the importance of these sites in my in one of my previous videos, the Native American subsistence methods video that I did. But what I want to point out about these is these papers were only put out a year from each other, 1 year from each other. For an organization, for a secret organization in the archaeological community to supposedly be stopping new information from coming out and changing the status quo, they certainly are doing a terrible job at it. If not one but 2 different papers changing the status quo come out within a year of each other. So again, that just doesn't add up. Another thing, and I'm finally bringing this up. So you've noticed that I've been counting all the authors on these recent academic papers. So Graham Hancock has this idea, and he talks about this idea of how it's only single individuals who bring up these new ideas, and then they are ambushed and overwhelmed by the sheer opposition of the archaeological community who don't want the status quo to change. But I've shown multiple papers with, between 3 to 26 different authors, all of them either disagreeing, coming up with new ideas, or disagreeing with each other. It's never one individual. Sorry, that's not true. There were some papers I showed that were one individual, but you know what I mean. The point is that it's a myth that there's only one individual that comes up with these theories. Like maybe one archaeologist will come up with one hypothesis, but oftentimes archaeologists work together. In fact, archaeologists work together all the time. I myself am in the middle of working on co-authoring a future paper. So you know what I mean? The archaeologists are willing to work together, and two, they all come up with new ideas while working together. Okay, so the next evidence I want to show that there is no archaeology Illuminati is this little object right here, the Roman dodecahedron. Now, the Roman dodecahedron was an object found in France in Gallo-Rome. France was called Gaul during the Roman period. And it's been a little bit of a mystery as to what it might be. Some people talk about how they found candle wax in it and things like that. And that's exactly, and so I want to talk about this because this is a very good evidence of why coming up with new ideas is not ostracized in the archaeological community so long as you have sufficient evidence. So first we have this paper about gold in early Southeast Asia, where we see these Roman dodecahedrons here as tiny little beads used around necklaces. And this is brought up because the area they were found is connected to the Silk Road, which of course was connected via trade to Rome. So it's not surprising that along the line, over the course of, one guy drops it off here, say in Egypt, and then onwards, that it would eventually reach Southeast Asia. And you see they're worn here as little gold beads. And then we come again to China, South China, but still China, where we see they're not being used as they're still beads. They're not being used as necklaces, however. They're being used as grave goods. Because this is talking about grave goods, talking about various things they got via trade with the Parthian Empire. And here we are. This author right here is talking about these objects being used in a very different way than, say, the author here showing them being used as parts of a necklace or, say, a bracelet. And then again, we come here to another contradiction where this author talks about how the Roman dodecahedrons were used as a way of measuring, it could be used as a way to measure distance. And they show their math and how their math works out as well. So, pause to read and pause to read. So here we are. We have 3 different authors proposing 3 different ways that these Roman dodecahedrons could be used and were used. Yet these papers are still freely accessible. These archaeologists that all come up with these theories still have their jobs. Again, for an organization that supposedly prevents new information from coming out, they certainly are doing a terrible job at it. Okay, and now we come to the last piece of evidence I want to talk about. And this happened literally this week. And I bring this up because I've had a conversation about it. So essentially, this paper, written by Paul Pearson, Michele Botticelli, Jesper Eriksson, Jacek Olander and Leon Spruchnis talk about essentially a Roman coin. So what this paper is talking about is a Roman coin, or at least what was thought to be a Roman coin, that was discovered in Romania in 1713. However, in the 1800s, experts looked at the coin and determined it to be fake. However, these individuals authoring the paper came across, specifically Pearson, Paul Pearson, came across, they were unaware of it for the 300 years because it just sat in museum storage. But Paul Pearson, doing research for another book about the Roman Empire, in fact, the subject about the Roman Empire totally unrelated to this, he happened to come across the picture of the coin and looking at it, thought this is possibly real. And so we contacted the museum that the coins were at, asked if he could re-examine them, and as you can see, not only did they say yes, several of them helped him. So that in itself is a nail on the coffin of, the idea that you can't come up with new ideas. And here are their methods. And essentially, and here are more of their methods. So essentially, they decide, after looking at it, that it was in fact authentic. But they also do acknowledge that it was not in a very high quality coin. Essentially, the coin was made using a mold of gold and silver rather than the traditional Roman way where you put, like, say, a piece of silver in the middle, gold on top and gold on bottom, and then use a stamp to make the coins. But they do answer, or at least they try to answer, why this was of lower quality. And essentially, the emperor depicted on the coin, Sponsian, was not really an emperor. He was essentially a general during an event known as the Roman general during an event known as the Crisis of the 3rd Century, in which the Roman Empire actually began to lose territory, suffered issues of inflation, disease, constant warfare, raids from rival tribes, essentially a similar event to the Bronze Age collapse. And so what their hypothesis is for this is that he was a Roman general who had been stationed in Romania, which was the name of the province, when the crisis of the 3rd century was onset. And because Romania or Dacia, as it's also called, was one of the farthest flung provinces, it sort of fell out of the empire's hand. And so therefore, Sponsian did not have access. It fell out of the empire's hand in the 1240s, and Sponsian declared himself emperor 10 years later. And so essentially it's saying that he was not able to get a hold of, how to put this, he was not able to get a hold of, he no longer had Roman quality manufacturing techniques, is essentially what happened. As it says, it's like the only official mint in Dacia, which had been previously manufactured large quantities of bronze coins for the local economy, had been shut down in the mid-50s as the crisis developed. So essentially, he no longer had access to these high-quality Roman coin manufacturing techniques, and so that's why the inferior technique was used. However, this was also critiqued pretty much immediately by one of the curators at the said museum, Mary Beard, who says that there's still very powerful evidence they are fakes. Why I bring this up is because one thing she doesn't do is she doesn't try to ostracize or drive out Pearson and his colleagues. In fact, She says right here in this case, the new scientific evidence shows that the coins were abraded, suggesting they had been in circulation for a while, and earth deposits suggest they had been buried for some time, not just quickly deposited by forgers to be quickly dug up again. Those are not nugatory considerations, i.e., those are still good considerations. She just disagrees with the conclusion that they are real, and she thinks they are fake. So there you have it. One, this is not somebody who is trying to end somebody's career. Two, is not somebody by himself making a new claim. He has colleagues, like we've seen with all the other papers. And three, this is just a matter of difference in opinion, and it shows how the scientific method works in archaeology. And it shows how important it is to have sufficient evidence. So, i.e., as I've been showing here throughout all this, archaeologists can have contradicting opinions all the time. It doesn't mean there's an archaeology Illuminati. It just means people disagree. And people can have differing opinions. So there is that. No archaeology Illuminati. All right, so now I want to go on to the last section. So essentially, this section is to explain why modern archaeology has such high and strict standards, why we require sufficient evidence, why things require peer review, why you need to show your methods, like I have been showing with all these academic papers, why some archaeologists may disagree and agree, which goes back to why archaeologists need sufficient methods. And it all goes back to archaeology's dark history. Because unfortunately, archaeology does have a dark history, like many of the modern sciences. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at involves human remains. So trigger warning if you don't like to see that, and I apologize. So the first thing we're going to look at is the Piltdown Man hoax. Let's see here. Okay, yeah. So the Piltdown Man hoax. So essentially, in 1912, archaeologists at the University of London, an archaeologist at the University of London, announced that he had found a prehistoric ancestor, a distant ancestor to humans, the Piltdown Man. And it was in his eyes, it was the most distant ancestor that they had found. And so he hypothesized that it was actually England that Homo sapiens came from. This was before the discovery of Lucy and Australopithecines in Africa. We come from Africa, but at this point in time, the idea was that, at least in part, that we came from England. And even after this was disproven with the discovery of Lucy and other things, Piltdown Man was at least thought to be real. Until the 1950s, when researchers just simply re-examining Piltdown Man determined that this was not a real find. What they figured out was using they had better technology, essentially. They had better technology than obviously archaeologists had in 1912. And so using this new technology, they were able to determine that, one, the bones had been artificially aged via cooking and a variety of other methods. And two, the teeth and the jaw actually came from not an ancient hominin, but an orangutan. And then three, the skull was actually a modern human skull that had actually been bought from possibly a curiosity market, because unfortunately human skulls were sold like that back then, sort of like mummies were ground up into dust and sold as types of medicine. And so so with all that, it was very easily determined that Piltdown Man was a hoax. Now, to this day, nobody's sure who did it. they're not sure. They don't know if it was the archaeologist who found it, or one of his colleagues who was trying to play a joke, or who knows. But that doesn't change the fact that somebody who knew about archaeology made this hoax. Which again, this in itself is one of the reasons why so many methods of dating and testing and a variety of other things are done to determine whether or not something is real. Next, we come to one that is very close to my heart because of how close I am to one of these sites, the Etowah Mounds, and that is the mound builder myths. So essentially, from the late 1700s through the 1800s and early 1900s, it was believed that the various mounds like Poverty Point, Serpent Mound, the Etowah Mound's only 30 minutes from me, Cahokia, etc., were not built by the Native Americans, by the First Nations people, but instead were built by a lost white race that came here, built them, and then the Native Americans came in and slaughtered them and wiped them out. One of the earliest proponents for this, or at least one of the earliest proponents for the idea of some of the little minor iterations, because there are actually several versions of it, was Thomas Jefferson. Now, to his credit, when he examined, he did his own sort of early archaeological excavations of some of the mounds, and he, in his notes, said that he was unable to determine who built them, and more excavations needed to be done. But he was also still talking about how, essentially how Native Americans didn't build them and things like that. And this sort of continued in a variety of different versions. One, there was the idea that ancient giants built them. In fact, we have some sort of yellow journalism or sensationalist news articles from the 1800s about the Etowah Mounds, for example, talking about how supposedly a 14-foot high body was found in the mounds. Now, of course, it's important to note, one, that's not that big, but also two, when bodies decay and the ligaments begin to fall off and things like that, bones tend to drift apart. So people look, when there are skeletons in the ground, they tend to look taller than they actually are. But so, of course, people didn't think about that. And so here we have these articles talking about how giants built the mounds. And then, of course, we have the one of the most prevalent, unfortunately, and still existent ideas of the mound builders was the idea that people from Egypt or the lost tribes of the Israelites or what have you came here and built these mounds. And people began to tout that as tout these people as the real builders of the mounds based off of forgery artifacts such as these brass plates you see here with I guess what is supposed to be proto-Israelite. Now, of course, we now know for 100% fact that it was the Native Americans, the First Nations peoples, who built the mounds. So much so that even Graham Hancock doesn't deny it. But that didn't stop these things from happening. That didn't stop mounds from being looted, and Native American First Nations people's bodies from being taken. That didn't stop artifacts from being faked. All kinds of things. And it still doesn't stop some artifacts from being faked. So again, this is why the scientific method is so integral to modern day archaeology, and why sufficient evidence is required before making determinations about who built what or who lived where, etc. Okay, now we're going to go on to one of the darkest, if not the darkest, part of archaeology history, the Nazis. So essentially, with the rise of the Nazis, Hitler and the Nazi inner circle created a branch for archaeology. And I'm probably going to butcher this. The Ananarabe. So the Ananarabe, the Nazi archaeology division, was sent out to a variety of places, including Central Asia and Iran, to try and prove the Aryan race. The Nazi archaeology division are the ones responsible for the false interpretation that this symbol here is the Irminsul, a holy object mentioned in the Frankish annals that the Saxons of Saxony worshipped before being forced to convert to Christianity. And they also wrote down a lot of very racist interpretations of the petroglyphs in Scandinavia that date to the Nordic Bronze Age. And to me, the most alarming and dark part of even this dark history is when the Nazi archaeology division went to areas like Tibet and began to measure people's skulls to prove how inferior and how they were less intelligent than the white race. And again, this is why, one, we have such strict methods in conducting archaeology, and two, it's why we require sufficient evidence before making claims. And also, both connected and not connected, this is why studies on, like, say, human population or communities and things like that require such more strict guidelines, like, i.e., permission and informed consent and things like that. All right. So now we move on to the next thing. This individual is an individual who's well known in both modern in the modern world, both outside of the archaeological community and in the archaeological community. This is Heinrich Schliemann, and he is well known for discovering Troy. But you want to know how he discovered Troy? By using dynamite to blow through 9 different archaeological cultural layers. In fact, most of the academic papers about Troy that come out in the past 10, 15 years or more are talking about are about cleaning up the destruction that Heinrich Schliemann caused. Which, as I keep driving home, is why archaeology requires such meticulous methods. It requires you to talk about your methods. Requires to show your methods. Definitely, and it's why you require. Again, it always goes back to the sufficient evidence, because who knows how much stuff he destroyed that could have either backed up his claims or could have contradicted his claims. We'll never know. I mean, we still think it's Troy. We still have a lot of archaeology around it, but the point is, this doesn't change the question of how much was lost, how much evidence for anything was lost. It's always the sufficient evidence. It's always the show your methods. None of the stuff, like even like the methods. The methods goes all the way back to when I was talking about episode 1, with Danny Hillman. All of this stuff is connected, and that's why archaeology doesn't take these pseudoscientists seriously. That's why they don't take Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock and Danny Hillman seriously, because they think they're going to come through like Heinrich Schliemann and make this new brand discovery, and they're even doing things very similar to him. They're ignoring cultural context just to go, tunnel vision to what they want. And that's exactly what Heinrich Schliemann did. So, yeah, that's what I'm going to leave it at. We need always sufficient evidence, and the methods that are used are important, and that's why we don't take Graham Hancock and others seriously. So there you have it. There is my in-depth analysis of the claims that Graham Hancock makes through episodes 1 through 8, as well as the analysis of of whether or not his claims about the archaeology, as I coined it, the archaeology Illuminati exists or not, as well as why modern archaeology has such high standards. All right, well, I hope these 3 videos were informative. And if you have any questions for me and you want me to cover anything else in these that I talked about in these videos, feel free. And I hope you all have a good day.